Farewelling a season. Why I am no longer creating scrapbooking content. I became a scrapbooker because I wanted to tell my family's stories in a medium that I found inspiring, useful, and enjoyable. I have always loved paper, and scrapbooking was a way to play with a colourful, interesting, and ever-changing array of materials and creative techniques that kept me hooked for years. I loved the structure of weekly or monthly storytelling. I loved the way albums provided a template for organising the stories that I wanted to tell. It worked for me, and for a long time both the process and the product brought me joy. As most of us do these days, I shared my scrapbooking projects online. As a teacher and an inveterate chatterbox, the medium that I was most drawn to, in addition to Instagram, was process videos. As anyone who knows me will tell you, I love to share knowledge, probably to an annoying degree. If there's an idea, skill, or process that I've mastered, I want to talk about it, teach it, and pass it on. Even if I haven't fully mastered it yet, I want to be in that learning process with other people, and I want us to learn from each other. Knowledge and ideas excite me, and the way they grow and change with each person who takes them on is something I find endlessly beautiful. So sharing the process of creating my scrapbooking projects was something that came very naturally to me. It quickly became very fulfilling too. Every time someone said, "I'm going to try that in my own album," or "I had a go at that but I changed it like this," I felt like I had done a tiny bit of good with my work. But I also found joy in other aspects of being a scrappy YouTuber. I loved feeling like I was part of a wider group of creators and storytellers. But that's also where things start to get a bit more complicated. Whenever you share your work and ideas online, you become part of a community. The nature and degree of your engagement with that community will depend on lots of factors, but by participating in it, you become one of its many composite pieces, all interconnected by search terms, tags, algorithms, and interested users. For creators, this is important. Without these interconnections, it's very hard to find and connect with an audience. I think it's important to note here that communities are entities in and of themselves. They are more than the sum of their parts, and we can see this in the ways that they develop cultures, practices, and value systems, both explicit and implied, that define them in ways that no individual member can. The way these evolve and develop are many and varied, and far more complex than I can go into here. But the key point is that they're always tied up with power, privilege, and wider social norms. As they develop, they become more codified, more powerful, and more prescriptive. They become entrenched and continue to reinforce themselves until they become the defining features of that community. From there, they often blow out into unrealistic ideals or ossify into stereotypes. They define the behaviours, values, aesthetics, and ideologies that group members must adopt in order to be deemed acceptable and continue to belong. These value systems and norms then become tools that can be used by people within the group to exercise control over each other, determine rank and popularity within the group, and gatekeep access to membership. This applies everywhere, from sports clubs to political parties, online communities to churches. Humans are really, really good at it. We needed to be to survive the evolutionary process that got us here. It's just what we do. So with this idea of group rules in mind, what do you see when I ask you to picture a scrapbooker? What kind of person does this particular group accept, validate, promote, and, dare I suggest it, actively produce? What do they look like? What kind of family do they have? What do they value and believe? Hold that idea in your mind as I go on. As a person with ADHD, I have never been able to generate any interest in tasks and projects that I don't feel an authentic connection to. So, while I wanted to continue to grow my YouTube audience and expand my reach, I never considered making anything that wouldn't also have been made if no one else was watching it, as it were. I made the albums and projects that told my family's stories. But I also had a mind to my audience, and that's an important part of producing any text. You think about who is going to be consuming it and what they will think of it. I wonder if you can see where this is going. As I made my videos and considered my audience, a kind of dialogue started to evolve. I would publish something and the feedback would come in. It came in likes, dislikes, subscribes and unsubscribes. It came in comments, emails, and DMs. So much of it was good, kind, encouraging, and uplifting. But of course, there were other voices, and those voices were harmful to me in a way that couldn't be undone or drowned out by the kind ones. It's hard to know how to deal with people who express pity for your son who will never get a father, or who feel they need to express their disgust at the wedding photos you share that include you kissing your wife. I won't go on about specifics, but I do need to explain that this was hard to take in and move past, and that it also seems pretty representative of the values of large sections of the scrapbooking community. Not all, probably not even most, but enough to make it feel like a space that's neither mentally nor emotionally safe for me. My journals and scrapbooks are not just little stories. They're records of who I am and the people I love, and the emotional connection is correspondingly deep. That means the vulnerability is too. I've always been a bit of a fighter. I'm not one to back down, and when I see something that seems unjust, I'm very quick to stick my neck out and say or do something about it. When it came to this particular situation, my response was to just keep being here, doing my thing, and making the people who didn't like it uncomfortable. I saw telling my stories as an act of defiance in some ways, and I hoped that I could maybe make it easier for other queer, disabled, or otherwise different scrappers to find their place too. So I found myself in this space of wanting to retain an audience while still being myself. I tried to walk a precarious middle line between keeping myself palatable to the community gatekeepers while attempting to assert my own identity and emphasize the points of difference that made me me. I don't think it takes much imagination to see the internal conflict that this created, and it doesn't take much more to predict how it would turn out. At this point, it's important to note that there's only so much you can grow as a creator without the endorsement and support of brands. People who aren't on design teams only grow so much, and after that they need the additional reach that working with big companies gets them. You create for them and they share your work with their customer or client base, and there's mutual, often exponential growth. In my time as a scrappy content creator, I did get a degree of engagement from the companies who create and dictate the culture of the community, but never any actual endorsement. Notable exceptions to this rule were Paisley Press, Freckled Fawn, and Rosie's Studio, all indie companies who are way more open, supportive, and accepting than most. The big companies might very occasionally share one of my projects on their Instagram stories, but never on their main feeds. They might reply to my comments, but never endorse my work or link to my videos or other social media. They knew I existed, but wanted to maintain a plausible deniability of any actual relationship. So there was no way I was ever going to be invited onto one of their design teams. For a long time, I believed this was because my work wasn't good enough, or my audience was too small, or because of the fact that I lived too far away down here in Australia. And I just kept trying. But as I watched the big companies like Felicity Jane, Hip Kid Club, Ali Edwards, Studio Calico, American Crafts, etc., take on makers who also live in the Southern Hemisphere, creators with smaller followings than me, and scrappers whose work was of a similar style and standard to my own, and who at times directly copied my projects for their design team submissions, I started to look around for what it was about me that consistently set me apart. And every time I landed in the same place. The one thing that set me apart was my queerness. And companies whose customer base is made up overwhelmingly of religious, conservative white women do not want to court disapproval by being associated with openly LGBTIQA+ creators. As scrappers, our work is about us. So when they promote what we make, these companies are, by extension, endorsing who we are. And I don't honestly believe that those I listed will ever want to do that. Now that I've stepped back to get some perspective, I'm surprised at my own naivete. It took most of these companies till 2020 to actively start including women of colour, and they're still expecting pats on the back for that. The idea of them welcoming the gays is frankly laughable. And while this is backward, homophobic, and unfair, it's very easy to see and understand. The scrapbooking community is fed, mediated, and created by the scrapbooking industry. What is endorsed, valued, celebrated will only ever be dictated by what sells. It's a recursive loop, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is not in line with what I value as a creator or as a human being. It actively hurts me and undermines my well-being, my sense of self, and my enjoyment in the creative process. So I have chosen to stop participating. I will no longer be creating content that endorses or advertises, for free, the products of companies that consider me inferior. I will no longer be engaging in the process of sharing my family's stories with a community of people who find us distasteful. I value my skill, my time, and my well-being, and I am done with giving them over to companies who want to extract what profit they can from them while simultaneously showing them so little respect. I will continue recording our lives because I will always be a storyteller, but I will no longer be offering my memory-keeping projects up for either censure or approval. They, and the people they are about, are far, far too precious for that. In terms of what's next, I am simply going to move forward with creating and sharing in a way that will keep me connected to who I am and what I love. I'm quietly excited about this because the shift in focus is already allowing me to create more authentically and joyfully. I think it will allow you to get to know me better as I begin to share many of the things that I have not felt able to while ever I had an eye to appeasing the gatekeepers. I know many of you won't like this new me, but it's important to realise that she's not new. She's the me you've been following all along, but she's being herself. Remember that you are very free to unsubscribe, unfollow, and disengage. And please don't make any parting comments as you go. I am not interested in being criticised or absorbing any negativity about a decision that I've come to thoughtfully, honestly, and with my values and well-being as the primary motivators. Those of you who stay will, I hope, find something honest and joyful to connect to here. I'm hoping we can, with this fresh start, create a safe and happy space to be ourselves. And as ever, tell the story.